My name is Awad Al-Bareki, Chief Global Officer here at Trend, and I will be moderating this session. On behalf of Dr. Mohammed Al-Ali, the CEO of Trends and Advisory, it's my great pleasure to welcome our guests, our audience, and who's joining us via the live stream as we live stream this session. Today's symposium is titled German Culture Relationship and is broadcasted from Trends Research and Advisory stand in Abu Dhabi Book Fair. This symposium will be held in 2 sessions. Each session will take approximately 30 minutes, each speaker 15 minutes, and followed by Q&A session. With that, now please allow me to introduce our first guest. His Excellency Ali Abdullah Al-Ahmed. He's the Director of Strategic Communication at UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Al-Ahmed has worked as UAE Ambassador to France, Germany, and UAE Permanent Delegate at the UNESCO. Al-Ahmed has also worked as the Director of European Affairs at the Ministry, where he was responsible for bilateral relationship between UAE and European countries. Before joining the diplomatic work, Al-Ahmed held different positions in media and telecommunication sector in UAE. First as the Director of Abu Dhabi TV, and then Salat Chief Corporate Communication. So we need to take the chance to congratulate you, Al-Ahmed, in publishing your new book titled The German Experience, where he shares his experience in Germany as being UAE ambassador for more than 4 years. With that, his title for this discussion is going to be UAE-German Cultural Dialogue, a UAE Perspective. With that, I give you the floor, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Awad. Thank you very much. واضح صوت؟
نعم.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces. The German Experience, it's a book that's published during Sharjah Book Fair, the last one, and Abu Dhabi Book Fair got translated to English and to German. What really motivates me to write the book, honestly, it was a story that I always wanted to talk about and to bring to the UAE, which is about the vocational training in Germany. But how I landed on the vocational training was different. Usually in Berlin, I would go to a small bakery. That's where I would have my coffee in the morning. And one day, the owner of the bakery, he will walk out with his son, and he was so proud and putting his arm around his son, saying, "Today, my son have become a beginner baker, khabbaz mubtadi, and he is the 6th generation in my family to do that." Then I asked his son. He said he studied for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, and he's been training in his father's bakery for another 1.5 years. Then I thought about it. I said, almost about 4 years. Then you graduated as khabbaz mubtada, as beginner baker. What did you study? Then he explained to me, about how the bread making in the entire Europe was part of the civilization, and he explained to me what sort of bread they're making, and he went to the whole history of it. Then I thought about it. I said, let me find out more about the vocational training, which is the baker was part of this training. Then I found out there is more than 330 jobs in Germany. You need to be graduated of the vocational training to get that job. About 70% of high school graduates, they would go to vocational training. I visited some of the vocational training center. I remember one of the director was telling me, you don't need to be a graduate, a university graduate, to be successful and to advance in your career. And in fact, today, Germany have the highest skilled labor globally. Not only that, and the unemployment among youth, which is a very dangerous indicator, is very low. Started vocational training, then eventually they advanced to become a skilled labor. But when you look deeper also into it, there is about more than 400,000 German company is part of this program. And a lot of the German investment and the profitability they make, they inject back into the training program to make it stronger. Now those training program, they get updated year after year, so they match what's the requirement of the market. Almost there is about 500,000 jobs created by the vocational training. There are some countries who tried, I would say, to adapt the German models. Some have been successful to an extent, but not to the extent as you see it, how it is integrated into the German society as a whole. That part actually led me to the first question, which is before I left Abu Dhabi going to Germany, it always came to my mind. Why do we today, when we say made in Germany, what comes in mind is quality. What comes in mind is perfection. Why is that? And why, this is something either whether you go to the east, or you go to the west, you go to any continent, as long as it is branded German made, what comes to your mind is the quality. And when you look at it a little bit, I think when you live in the German and you deal with them, I think the first thing you see, it is one ecosystem. From the house, from the way the kids is raised, from the school, and how the school also try to always improve the systems they have, and going to the workforce itself. Now, I would tell you also, with notes in German, they do take some time. They do take their time to analyze, to study, to restudy. And I remember a discussion happened a few years ago and was about electrical cars. And somehow, there's a lot of research in Germany about electrical cars, etc. And today when you look at it, what is the German share out of the electrical global it's not much. But it's always that sort of trying to provide something that I won't say perfection, but very close to perfection. And it is, I would say, the philosophy of the society itself. You don't need to promote yourself as yourself. It's what you made of your hand. It's what your hand made, that kind of it would promote you eventually. That part, when you look at it and when you look at the history of Germany, we're talking about mainly two distinguished phases after the end of the World War II. The first phase, from 1945 to 1989, when Berlin Wall fell, but 45 years of rebuilding. And you're talking about destruction almost in every major city in Germany. And I'm not talking about small destruction. I'm talking destruction to the, those built from rebels. And the questions always came, how would the German will gain the trust of the Europeans and the trust of the world? That was a big question in my mind. How would they earn it? And that's where the focus of the German power went into industry. And when we talk about the modern industry, that's, I would say, where most of the focus happened at the beginning, rebuilding their countries. And we're talking about the first 45 years of a country that's divided in two, with totally different economic models. Here you have capitalist and you have socialist. And even Berlin itself was cut off like a pie. It's even today when you go, there's a French influence, there is the British, and there is the American part. And to put all that together, and in 1989, when the unification happened. Now, first of all, when the unification happened, And this is very clear. You go on YouTube and you listen to Margaret Thatcher. There was a fear. There was an actual fear in Europe about the reunification of Germany. We see that very clear in many of the European leaders at that time. I won't say it's the only reason, but one of the first reasons why this country got united is there is President Mitterrand in France, and there is Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Germany. Those two, the trust between those two leaders. I actually, in the book, I show some of the pictures. They're holding hand in hand. If it wasn't for those two, in my opinion, maybe the unification would not have happened. Yes, there's a blessing from America, blessing from, but is that kind of a trust? And when that happened, actually, the relation, the German and the French relation, it is the core and the solid base for the European Unions. We all know that now. But when you look at it also a step back, we see in 1963, Chancellor Konrad Adenauer and Charles de Gaulle, they made a treaty in 1963. I believe it's the Versailles Treaty. And those 18 years after the end of the war, they created what's called the office, the French German Youth Office. They realized, it may happen again. So we need to build the trust between the two people. And it started in 1963. Thousands of Germans come study students in France. The same thing from France to Germany. They created a TV channel that they speak both languages. And it become solid, the peace of Europe, the peace of the world is basically, once Europe becomes safe. And today, when those two leaders come together and build this solid relation, it becomes prosperity, for the entire Europe. They started, from that treaty, they went to European market, from European market to the European Union, etc. And I believe that's a realization that, the hate speech, which was previously between the two nations, they went to war for centuries. And to decide by choice, no, we're going to stop this trend intentionally, interrupt it, and say, and that's enough. We need to build our both countries. And when we look at it today, Germany is the fourth largest economy in the world. Today, Germany, one of the main contributors on the major issues that concern the whole globe when it comes to environment protection, when it comes to human rights. I believe that would not have happened if it wasn't for that peace that created by those French and the German leaders. I would say, there are some lessons I learned the hard way. For me, it was an eye-opening. Today, when we look at the book histories here in UAE and read about it, for us, it's a bit distant, honestly to say. But to live in Germany and to walk by a building, and this building, takes you back to a particular event in 1941 or something. Then you go to another city, and you get that feeling. That's what motivates me. Say, well, maybe there is something I would like to share with people. It is, and the book comes from visiting many cities in Germany. And because of the federal system in Germany as well, and Germany, as you know, it only became a solid one country, maybe 1874, I believe, when Bismarck became the first chancellor. But before that, there was different kingdoms, I would say. But always that, when you look at it closer, they always that, I would say, economic, cooperation, integrations. And it's always been that, you go to one place, to one city, and they are very distinguished in one industry, you move to another one. There is so many different things. And I hope that culture and that openness also, I've seen it's a variety of culture through Abu Dhabi Book Fair. It can also, we passed that. It's a very rich, diverse culture, and I believe we can learn a lot from it. Luckily for me, after Germany, I went to France, and honestly, the French UAE relation when it comes to culture, honestly, it is way advanced than any other. Not only compared with the German. You know, we have the Sorbonne, we have Louvre, and I believe the German culture also can benefit from UAE to become a gateway. Not everybody will have a chance to travel to Germany or to travel to France, and to have that piece of Germany in UAE, I believe it would be of a great exposure for the German culture, and I believe you can learn a lot from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this informative discussion. I totally agree with you, especially trust takes time, and especially political trust. I remember once Reagan once said, trust and verify. So thank you very much. Before we open it to the floor, we'll have our second speaker, Dr. Christian Alexander. He's the Senior Fellow and the Director of International Security and Terrorism Program at Trends Research and Advisory, as well as the Head of Strategic Studies Department. He was worked as an assistant professor at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi. He's a native of Germany, and he lived and worked in UAE. Discussion title is Exploring German Eyes. So, Dr. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Much, Awad, and thank you for your insightful comments, Your Excellency. I want to focus on a couple of issues of mainly delving into the nature of German-UAE relations, in particular Germany's political standing in the UAE, as well as mutual economic interests with cultural influences emanating from such entities as the Goethe Institute, the German School, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, with which Trends has an MOU. And then in reverse, I'll also touch on some of the issues that Emiratis are drawn to Germany for, tourist destination, as well as the appeal that Germany has in terms of automobiles that you already mentioned, and a few commonalities that both countries share. Of course, there are differences, but I'll focus on a couple of commonalities. First, I want to start off with just a general outline on Germany. His Excellency already mentioned that Germany is pretty much embedded within the European context and in the transatlantic alliance. A lot of Germany's focus is regional, meaning the EU. Germany has also displayed a strong commitment to multilateral institutions such as NATO, the UN, the EU, the G7, the G20, and has a deep-seated skepticism of any type of military engagement abroad. Germany in general is described as being pragmatic in its foreign policy. It's a central power in Europe, but it's kind of described as a hesitant, reluctant global civil power in the rest of the world. Germany's outlook or policy regarding the Middle East is focused on numerous objectives. For one, there is a distinct special relationship and responsibility of Germany towards Israel, given the past, and Germany often referring to this as a culture of remembrance. Germany for many years has also developed bilateral relations with Iran, known as the critical dialogue, constructive dialogue, and hence political dialogue, and the E3, E4 dialogue with Iran from the 90s onward. Germany, broadly speaking, when it comes to the Middle East, is kind of concerned about the export of conflict from the region to Germany per se via terrorism. If you think of certain young Germans who became radicalized through ISIS and lone wolf terrorist attacks in Würzburg, or Anis Amri in 2015, killing 12 Germans or visitors at a market Christmas market in Berlin. Another issue is the refugee movement and asylum seekers. I mean, if you think of it, of the 1.3 million asylum seekers applying for asylum in the EU in 2015, 900,000 came to Germany within a period of 9 months. It obviously bears mentioning that Germany has no colonial past in the Gulf or the wider Middle East, and although its visibility is increased, clearly the main dominant regional powers or powers that are kind of more influential in the region are still the United States, China, Russia, and France. So again, the expectations in the regions are that Germany needs to seek a more active role and become more involved in the affairs of the region. One of the major components of Germany's interest in the GCC is obviously economics. Trade and economic interests have formed the strongest relations with the UAE of all the GCC countries. Germany is the UAE's fourth largest trading partner after India, China, and the US, and 30% of German trade with Arab countries passes through the UAE. I mean, obviously specific branches of German industry are well known: automobiles, heavy machinery, spare parts, electric appliances, and chemical products. In terms of cars and technology, many Emiratis are obviously taken by German high-end cars, fascination with German highways, and driving high-speed cars on German highways. I mean, I've encountered lots of young Emiratis who've said that they've been to Germany just to be able to drive on the Autobahn. Obviously, there are about 10,000 Germans currently residing in major cities in the UAE, and only 1,150 Emiratis currently residing in Germany. And if you look at the comparison to countries like Canada, UK, India, and US, that's kind of a very small minority. But overall, there are currently 900 German companies operating in the UAE. And obviously, one of the recent developments is that the German engineering companies, Siemens, has moved its UAE headquarters to the Al Wasl Dome in the Expo 2020 site, and has employed about 250 engineers, and so their hub will be at the former Expo site. In terms of the cultural realm, obviously Germany has a foreign cultural policy budget in the amount of 200 million euros per year, and it supports certain various cultural institutions that I want to briefly talk about. There is obviously the Goethe Institute, which is a language institution. There are about 159 cultural institutions, Goethe institutions, in 98 countries currently. And obviously, people who attend these schools can get certificates, and their certificates are accredited in Germany. There is a German school in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Sharjah. And of course, many of the pupils there are not Germans, but actually foreigners. So German schools are part of the cultural exchange. There's the Deutsche Welle, which is kind of similar to the BBC, which is a broadcasting entity that provides television, radio, and online services. It has various programs as well in Arabic, so it does cater to the Middle East. There's the Deutsche Akademischer Austauschdienst, which is kind of the agency responsible for international academic cooperation. And there are about 350,000 foreign students in Germany in 2020 studying in various degrees programs. Now, there are also many German think tanks. One of them I already mentioned, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, but there are others like the Orient Institute, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, CARPO, the Bertelsmann Foundation, the Bosch Foundation, the Berghoff Foundation actually was involved in global peace negotiations in the Yemen conflict in coordination with the UN in 2016. His Excellency already mentioned that I think France is much more advanced in this sector because through the Alliance Française, through their heavy cultural cooperation in its outposts like the Sorbonne, the Louvre, and so on, they clearly have an advantage over, the German cultural projection, I guess. Now, in terms of academic and university cooperation, this could emerge as another common interest interesting field of cooperation. I mean, the German University in Cairo and the German University of Technology in Oman are really the only two German universities that operate in the region. If you compare that to British universities, American universities, they all have hubs and outposts in the UAE and the GCC. So Germany is kind of way behind in that sense. But to be fair, the German Emirati Institute was just created at the Aachen University, so there's going to be some sort of collaboration going along in that sense. So you could argue that Germany still needs to do more in terms of enhancing its visibility, its international reputation when it comes to partnerships with other universities in the region. I think one of the problems is that Germany or German universities don't really see education as a kind of an economic good, but more as a cultural good that's entitled to be served without having to pay for it. And if those familiar with the German system know that the tuition fees in Germany are fairly low. And so again, another issue is that German universities don't really actively participate in educational fairs in the region. They're very absent. And the last issue is that German as a language is not a language that's easily to learn in that sense. So that's another hindrance one could argue. Medical tourism, that's an issue where many UAE patients go to Germany for medical services, and Germany is adapted in a sense to international patients, offering Arab-speaking concierge services, separate prayer rooms, restaurants that prepare halal meals, accommodating traveling relatives. Obviously, Germany has an array of specialist clinics with a good reputation. Germany is considered to be safe and clean. So I think that's a draw for Emiratis to go there for specific medical purposes. Of course, there's been a dip in medical tourism in the last couple of years because the UAE has improved its healthcare services, and the funding from the government for outbound patients has also been reduced to some degree. Obviously, the German National Tourism Office had campaigns in the recent past to attract more GCC tourists. So they've had a campaign called Embrace German Nature. They've created a national gallery. They have a carnival of culture that's set to take place this summer. And they are working on what is called a House of One. Again, similar to the UAE, wanting to house different religions under one hub. Now, German tourists obviously also flock to the UAE, primarily to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And the reputation for Germans is that the UAE is a luxury destination, although obviously there are many types of tourisms that one can engage in the UAE. With special architecture, shopping destination, warm climate, it's also considered to be affordable and safe. So I think that's a draw for German tourists as well. Obviously, Germany's image has been shaped by other activities like the German Pavilion, that was one of the most popular and sought after at the Expo 2020. The Oktoberfest is another cultural draw here in the UAE, celebrated in many different emirates. And of course, German football clubs have come over the years, over the winter months, to stage their training preparation for the second part of the season in Germany. And of course, that is also something in terms of public branding for German football clubs. Now, what are the commonalities? And I'll end my presentation with 4 commonalities, some of which with His Excellency has already touched on. One, having to do with the issue of application of soft power. Now, both Germany and the UAE use soft power, while of course Germany is engaged in military activities in Kosovo and Afghanistan. The focus is really not so much on military projection, but mainly on using soft power to convince, to persuade, to kind of enlighten other countries that will follow suit. And the same can be said about the UAE. So the important part for both countries is political stability and economic cooperation. The second issue has to do with foreign aid and humanitarian causes. Both Germany and the UAE are major donors and provide aid to various countries. Their objectives are primarily on developmental and humanitarian challenges. Germany has seen a sharp increase in official development assistance in the years from 2011 to 2017. in the Middle East in particular. And of course, the UAE is frequently being ranked as the world's largest donor in development aid in relation to its national income, and regularly exceeded its UN target of 0.7% of its gross national income. This third thing that I want to touch on in terms of commonalities has to do with the notion of a diverse and multicultural society, which you also mentioned. So both countries have embraced foreigners as they are accepting them into their workforce, or as refugees or residents or tourists, and all of this has been popularized through the notion of tolerance, and in German, Willkommenskultur, as they say. Now, of course, in Germany, there's been certain right-wing parties that have engaged in anti-immigration and xenophobic attitudes, but I think in general you could say that the new and young generation of Germans are in favor of positive integration. So again, I think that's another commonality. And the last thing that I want to end with has to do with the concern and cooperation of renewable energy. Both Germany and the UAE are interested in renewable energy, and Germany has ramped up its cooperation and investments in the UAE in green hydrogen projects since 2021. Climate and energy diplomacy at the forefront of German-UAE relations. And ADNOC actually just signed a contract with German copper manufacturer Orbis and energy firms to ship blue ammonia to Germany. So both Germany seeks to be climate neutral by 2045 and the UAE by 2050. So I think that's the fourth commonality that I see that brings both countries together. And on that note, I'd like to end.
Presentation. Yes, before we open to the floor, I have one question. I'm going to ask Your Excellency. What do you think of cultural tourism and the future of that between Germany and the Gulf countries?
Well, I will maybe talk about the UAE here. The culture tourism in UAE is really becoming a major element in the entire tourism of UAE. And when we talk about tourism in UAE, we're really talking about almost 11% of the entire GDP. And that's also the plan, is to increase that as well in the future. Number of tourists in UAE have exceeded 20 million. Now, the culture tourism, as I would say, at its beginning stages. But today, when you just go to Abu Dhabi Louvre and you see all those buses of tourists coming from all over the world, from different nationality, you see something started from nothing that was not there at all. Maybe most of the tourists in UAE, they come from different nationality. Most of them, I would say, maybe they did not have a chance to go to Europe, and you're bringing part of Europe to here. And I think you all know that the Abu Dhabi Louvre is not only about the French history or French museum part, art pieces. It's about the world art as well. So today here, when we look at the book fair, it is not a matter of halls and you come here and you buy books and you leave. It's that connection that's happening. And especially after we're now in post-corona, and I think a fair like this would really encourage tourism, culture tourism. I believe in UAE will grow. The government has backing that up. We see it growing today. When we talk about Saudiyat and what's happening in Saudiyat, it's really something unique. It has not happened before. We believe that will add to the reason why would somebody come to the UAE. Yes, you will be coming to the beach, to the sun, to the desert, to the entertainment, to the luxury, to the normal, to all of that. But you add to that the depth of culture tourism, and I believe that would really give varieties for the tourists. And in fact, if you look at the tourists that come into UAE, almost 25% are repeat. People who came to our country and want to come back. And maybe, come back, he will go to a different Emirates, smaller Emirates, bigger Emirates, etc. So we just need to give them more reason to come and visit us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we'll open the floor for Q&A. We'll open the floor for Q&A.
Well, thank you very much. I wasn't able to attend the first presentation, but I listened and I'm quite encouraged about the relationship between Germany and Gulf and the UAE specifically. Defense and security is very important in the Gulf. Could someone touch on the security and defense cooperation between Germany and UAE?
Yeah, sure. Maybe we can.
Yeah, sure.
UAE have very strong relation with Germany. They just celebrated 50 years of relations. Now, when you look at the German relation, I would say it does not fluctuate. We always know what to expect from Germany. Germany have a lot of economic relation with UAE. As you mentioned, that almost 30% of the entire trade, the German trade to the Arab world, come through us. So stability for the region is very important for Germany. Germany have good relation with Iran. Germany have good relation with Saudi Arabia, with India, etc. And I think all that to put together, I believe there would be more room, to share our concern together, naturally. And I believe the relation between the UAE and started very strong economically. There is also cooperations between UAE and Germany in many military fields as well. Not as advanced as other European countries, as France, for example. But yes, there is as well. And I believe it is for the benefit of both countries. When you talk to the German diplomat, they do believe that the model of UAE, if that model have gone also away further from our borders, that's good news. That's good news for the Germans, that's good news for us. And I believe we will try to advance this relation to secure the stability of the region.
Dr. Christian, do you have something?
Really have much to add. I think he already mentioned most of the things. So yeah.
Thank you all. Welcome to second session of Trends Symposium, Gulf-German Relation. Our first speaker is Claudia Kaiser. She's the Vice President, Business Development of Frankfurt Book Fair. Claudia was trained as bookseller and she has an MA degree in Chinese studies. She lived in China for more than as an editor for China Foreign Literature House. In 1998, she set up the German Book Information Center in China. She has been the Vice President of Frankfurt Book Fair since 2003. And in different positions, she was the Head of International Department, General Manager of Kitab, and the Head of Cape Town Book Fair. Currently in her role in Frankfurt Book Fair, she looks into the market of Asia, the Arab world, closely involved in organizing the Jakarta Content Week together with the 17,000 Islands of Imagination Foundation. Her title for today's discussion is Book Fair and Their Role in Enhancing Cultural Dialogue, the Cases of Abu Dhabi and Frankfurt Book Fair.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be in Abu Dhabi. As you probably know, that Germany is the guest of honor at this year's Abu Dhabi International Book Fair, and we're very happy that this is the case. We were going to be the guest of honor in 2021, but due to the COVID restrictions, we were able to have or enlarge our guest of honor presence to 2 years, 21 and 22, and here we are with a big presentation. You will probably see our stand. It's a very interesting, and it's really a first stand with an interesting clock and a lot of interesting So, and we have about 80 people in our delegation, publishers, authors, illustrators, and so on, and thinkers, and 40 plus events, including workshops for children. But coming back to, I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So book fairs, and I'm sure you will say a few more words about the guest of honor and things that we do here in Abu Dhabi at this time. The book fairs, wherever you are in the world, are always a very, very important platform for cultural exchange, because there are publishers, there are writers, there are all sorts of publishing, all sorts of writers, and whenever you have an exchange between the audience and the writer, between creativity, imagination, and being part of that imagination, new worlds come up, new thoughts come up, and they're always very, very important discussions. And it was, as was mentioned earlier, in this world, which at this point is seeing a lot of trouble, it is very, very important that we understand each other, and that we, or at least try to understand each other and know about each other. And what is a better way of getting to know each other than books? Traveling, yes, we heard about tourism, we heard about what it means to travel, but for 2 years we were not able to travel.
Yep.
And with the situation as it is now, many people are still not able to travel, and it's very, very important that they still know that the world is different in another place, and that cultures, that one thing doesn't mean, if I say so, if I do like this, it does maybe means no in Germany or even here, but it doesn't mean the same in India. You know, it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's very, very important that we understand each other. So books are a wonderful means to do so. And because book fairs are all about publishing and writers, those are the places. And as you can see here in Abu Dhabi, we have about 650 events where authors speak and have discussions. There's also a special relationship between Abu Dhabi Book Fair and the Frankfurt Book Fair. As you mentioned earlier, thank you for the introduction once again. We set up a company here together with the then Abu Dhabi Authority for Culture and Heritage, and together we were the first fair in this new ATNEC building. There were only 2 halls, and we were the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair was the very first fair here. Of course, the book fair had existed before a long time, but it then started to become more international and more professional. So there were many more professional events and professional exchange. So that lasted for quite a long time, and we are still working together and on many different levels. So that's a wonderful area of cooperation.
Thank you, Claudia, for this great
Thank you.
discussion. As our also previous speaker said, the book fair are not for books only. They provide connections, collaboration, but also some transmitted the culture between two countries. So before we open to question, our second speaker is Farid Badari. He's the director of Ghouta Institute in the Gulf region. Farid has had previous posting as country director of Ghouta Institute in Lebanon, Beirut, and in Palestine territories, Ramallah, as well as postings in Moscow and Munich. In the 90s, he was visiting professor at the University of Connecticut, USA. He's the producer and co-writer of the TV series Matab in Ramallah and West Bank. His today's discussion titled The Culture and the Gulf-German Relation Toward Understanding the Other. So Farid, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And we are celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations between the UAE and Germany, and this also means 50 years of cultural relations, of course. And we're here at one flagship event of these relations, and that's the book fair. The book fair is always a fixture in the cultural life of Abu Dhabi and the Emirates, and we are very honored and proud to be the guest of honor twice in a row due to COVID. I also heard the criticism of His Excellency Mr. Abdallah and also Mr. Alexander. Germany wasn't as present as France, for instance, they stated. And to some extent that's true. We don't have a Louvre, and we do not have a Guggenheim Museum, and we also do not have a Sorbonne University. And there are a couple of distinct differences between cultural relations of, let's say, France on one side and Germany. And this has a lot to do with how the cultural life in our countries are structured. Germany, as you know, and this is due to historic reasons, we had to learn it the hard way, is a very federal country. It's also a very decentralized structure of economics, culture, you name it. So we have a lot of cultural activities and a lot of cultural opportunities funded by the states and more even by the municipalities like the city of Berlin. But yes, if I asked you to name a German museum, you would probably think of Nefertiti, but you wouldn't probably even know what the name of the museum where she is named. Yes, we do not have these big names. We don't have these federally funded cultural structures. And by the way, Nefertiti is probably sooner or later going to be restored to where she actually came from, and that's Egypt. That's another thing that currently we are talking a lot about, restitution of things that are in Europe or in North America shouldn't be there because there's heritage of colonialism. Dr. Alexander mentioned the Goethe Institute as a language institute, and that's true, but only 50% true. We teach German and we prepare people to study abroad in Germany, but of course we are a cultural, first and foremost, a cultural institute like the Alliance Française, the Italian Cultural Center, Instituto Cervantes, or our friends from the Korean Cultural Center or the British Council. And we work with them closely. We have 160 institutes currently in a little bit over 100 countries. This always fluctuates a little bit because we get kicked out of countries occasionally, like Belarus quite recently. We have no real idea how long we are going to stay in Russia under the current conditions. So that changes. But it also gives you an idea about what we do, because we try to facilitate dialogue even under difficult circumstances. Fortunately, United Arab Emirates is a very easy country with regard to that. It's a country where it's very easy to operate, where we have clear structures, and where we can do what we want, and we appreciate that highly. We work in a lot of countries with so-called illiberal contexts. Russia is the best example at the moment, but also China, where we try to use the arts not as a means. You should never use the arts as a means or harness the arts, but as a artistic dialogue. Through arts, you can address issues that challenge our planet, that challenge that are important for the future, and it can be kind of a laboratory to explore things that are of importance for all of us without being explicit and without expressing things explicitly. So this is why diplomacy and foreign policy and the arts indeed have something in common. You sometimes, like a diplomat doesn't always, like maybe, there's this famous saying, if a diplomat says maybe, he means yes or something, but I think Voltaire that was. So yeah, we have something in common. We address issues without explicitly saying what's going on. On the other side, yes, we can address important issues. I'll give you a couple of examples of what that can look like, and it's a broad array, a broad scope and range of cultural events. We have the flagship events, the real big things, and the ambassador is never tired of yesterday and the day before yesterday of mentioning the Richard Wagner, the Valkyrie, event that we had in 2019. That was actually when I came here. The first thing I saw when the Bayreuth Festival performed Wagner, and I don't know, hosts of singers and musicians were flown in, and it was at the Emirates Palace, beautiful event. So that's the big thing, the one-off, top-tier, premium, platinum event. And for those who are not so much into Wagner, or some people feel like invading Poland when they hear Wagner too much, as Woody Allen's quipped. For those, we have other programs like the Gulf German Film Festival that shows films from Germany, but not only films from Germany with a German setting and German actors, but also films with, that are German co-production with countries from the MENA or South Asian region. So those are the event, and then we have more the long-term and cooperational projects. And one I would like to mention to you, that's Sawa. Sawa, those of you who know Arabic, it means together.
Yep.
Sawa, and that's a cooperation for professionals in the field of museums, and that's in cooperation with the Sharjah Museum Authority. We bring together young museologists from Germany and the Middle East, and now even from other European countries and even Argentina, talk about current issues in museology, which is at the moment, of course, the heritage of colonialism. And this has been going on for a couple of years now. A network has emerged from that. These people are in contact, share personal stories, but also professional stories. And so that's a very nice example of long-term cooperation. And Sawa got the Arab-German Youth Academy Humanities Award for its work in 2019, together with Mrs. Manal from the Sharjah Museum. You will, and you read the captions and the pictures and the exhibits, you will very often see lives in Berlin or funded by the city of Berlin or something like this. So it's not the big picture. It's very often almost all of the artists I know here have lived in Berlin for some time. So these, so that I would say is the soft power of German cultural relations on a maybe less visible scale, but I think in the long term very, very useful. And this brings me to soft power and cultural diplomacy. And I'm not a great fan of using these terms, because I think first you shouldn't. Artists are too precious and artists too precious to be harnessed as a tool for diplomacy. On the other thing, cultural diplomacy is a term that was molded by, I think it entered the lexicon of the State Department in '59 and then consecutively other state departments. And it was, it's using art as a means to obtain goals, to achieve goals. That's not how we should treat artists. Soft power, the same, was molded by Joseph Nye, who was a defense expert in the Clinton administration. Nothing bad with that, but so he just defined soft power as the means to success in world politics, or getting others to want the outcomes that you want, or the ability to shape the preferences of others. This is exactly what commercials do. A totally different thing. They should bring people together, totally open. There should be no prejudged or prejudiced outcome of what we want. We should sit together and, without knowing what comes out of it, exchange ideas without taboos, and then see what comes out of it. Even be prepared to hear things that we don't want to hear. In Germany, we hear a lot of things we would rather not hear, but we have to hear it, because not as much as other countries, but Germany has a colonial past, and we have to hear those things. And there are, as I already mentioned, there are artworks in museums in Berlin that probably shouldn't be there. And so, yeah, so we have to listen and have to be open to everything. I think that's the power. It's not the soft power, it's a hard power of the arts, but you should be open for anything that comes out of it. And yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it with that. We should listen to our partners. We should listen to people, to what our partners here want. So very often I come and say, Germany has so much to offer. Like, let's look at Sascha Walz, great performer, dancer. And they say, yes, but we would rather bring this and this artist who lived in Berlin for 3 months but is in India. And yes, we would do that. We have to listen to what our partners want in order to facilitate a dialogue. You cannot sit there and make plans for cultural programs without listening to what your partners want. I must say, I've been here since 2018 now, and I must say that the UAE is a very fertile ground and a very conducive environment for the arts. And we also see, since I've been here, we have things opened up so much, and we show a lot. I know German culture is not everyone's cup of tea, and it's sometimes harsh and sometimes touches on taboos. But yeah, people are ready to watch those films or listen to what we have to say and engage in a dialogue. And that's very, very precious. And yeah, thank you very much for being such a beautiful host country.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. Communication is important, and also, as we know, Goethe is not a language institute, it's more than that. It has a philosopher and has a cultural element of it. So with that, we will close this session. On behalf of Research and Advisory, I would like to thank all our speakers for today's session and symposium, our audience, and our audience from the live channels also. Thank you a lot for your participation, and see you in another event. Thank you.
Thank you very